Hi, I'm David Locke with Locke & Key Associates at Keller Williams. This is my podcast, and I'm fortunate to have my friend and master gardener, Susan Temple, as I call her, the gardening queen. Susan,
that's me.
Thanks so much for being one of my first guests.
Thanks for having me.
And I want to introduce you. You have worked for AnMed since 1985.
Yes, I'm in my 38th year.
Wow. And you are the executive assistant to the CIO.
Mm-hmm.
And you also write the Garden Shop articles for Electric City
Yes.
News. You've done that since 2011.
Yes.
And you've been a master gardener since 2006.
Correct.
And you, like me, are a South Carolina native.
How did you ever guess?
I know. We both have that spectacular, I say everybody else has an accent. We don't.
Yeah. Everybody else talks funny. It's not me and you.
Right. And you were raised in Greenville until you were 12.
Yeah.
And then you came to Anderson.
Might as well say I'm from Anderson though, but yeah. Not a whole lot of difference there.
Well, tell me, because you are probably more passionate about gardening even than me, which is saying a lot. So how did you become passionate about gardening?
Well, funny you asked that question when we are going to talk about curb appeal. But I bought a house in town on Blair Street when I had just turned 22 years old. It had been a rental house for about 17 years. They had parked in the front yard. It was the ugly house on the street, but I bought it because I could rent to own, and it was in a good neighborhood, and Mama lived right around the corner.
Fantastic.
And I didn't have two nickels to rub together, so I would go to grandmother's, dig up her azaleas, anything she would let me have out of her yard just to make my little house look better. And then it just turned into a passion, an addiction, an affliction, or whatever you want to call it from there.
I know my passion started because, my father's an agronomist, and one of my first memories, I guess I was 2, was bending over and putting the tomatoes in the holes that he had already dug. So I don't ever remember not gardening.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about curb appeal. So, because so many people, when I get ready to sell a house and list it for them, or somebody's going to purchase a house, and I'm going to negotiate the buying of the house, they immediately want to know, well, what can I do to increase my curb appeal? Mm-hmm. Especially, if somebody is selling a house, they don't want to put a lot of money in the house.
Exactly, to go off and leave it.
Right, because you don't want to buy a $300 Japanese maple that you can't really want to increase your resale value. Mm-hmm. So tell me, I asked you to think about what are the 3 most important things that somebody can do to give curb appeal to their front yard, especially if they're trying to sell unlisted.
Yeah. The first thing I would do is put down fresh mulch, either mulch or pine needles. I think pine needles are prettier.
Me too.
But mulch is more cost effective. So it just depends on what the budget is. Give yourself some nice borders, be that with some kind of rock or just a nice weed-eated, tended edge, something like that.
So there's a transition between the grass and the mulch.
Yeah. And that, fresh mulch is going to dress something up the easiest, most cost-effective way.
For sure.
And then just work with what you already have, if that's all your budget will allow.
Now, working with something you already have. So let's say they already have some turf, but like most people, if it's been neglected, then it's a mixture of many different grasses. Mm-hmm. Would you do any remediation to the turf, or would you just make sure it's nicely groomed?
Yeah, grass is very high maintenance.
For sure.
I don't know that the payoff would be worth the effort on that. I would put more money into the shrubs, the actual plants.
Right.
Because if those are established or even new and nicely done, the buyer is going to most likely keep those.
Right.
Whereas if you put your money into the lawn, you may have done centipede and they want fescue
or
zoysia, or they're going to take the lawn out because, lawnless is definitely a new trend.
Oh,
so
for sure.
You've spent the money on all of that seed, fertilizer, sand, aeration, all that goes along with the lawn, possibly for nothing.
Well, so many people, I know my dad always says that grass is the most expensive ornamental you will ever plant, because
It is.
it's not like a shrub that you paid $150 for, and you stick it in the ground, you make it established, by watering it a couple times the first few weeks. But grass, you're having to reseed it, you're having to aerate it, you're having to fertilize it, you're having to water it.
Right.
And if you've got a mixed lawn that's just very natural, you don't have the level of pesticides and water, and so much more ecologically friendly.
Correct.
Well, when someone doesn't want to spend a fortune, I know you talked about edging and doing mulch, but what is something other than mulch that you think would give somebody bang for their buck? We said mulch and edging. Is there a particular type of plant that they can use? Is there something else that they can do just in general to give their house curb appeal?
There again, depending on what kind of shrubs or plants they have already. A wonderful container, and in my opinion, containers are the one thing that bigger is always better.
For sure.
And it will be a bigger show. You won't have to water it as often, etc. Let's just say if you've got your typical house, front door in the middle, here in plants, you could get a pot to go kind of halfway on one side of the house. Not necessarily a matching, but a coordinating on the other side of the house. And, those pots may cost you $300 each.
Oh, for sure. Each one's going to be at least $60 or $70.
Yeah, even if you buy just a plastic to, for the show. But put a conifer in it, some type of, I would put a conifer.
Some type of evergreen, so you're not having, and also a conifer is more forgiving.
Yes. And then dress it up with some annuals or some ornamental grass or something in it. And that will make a strong statement from the street.
Right. So not necessarily flowers. I think a person immediately thinks, I need to go buy a lot of little teeny tiny pansies.
Right.
But I know one of the things I do in my garden is, rather than planting a lot of little small things, I will go get a hanging basket, take the hanging apparatus off, and I put that in, and I've already got a large plant that just looks better throughout the year, but it's immediately established.
Yeah, and especially if it's mixed, if it's got your petunias and your whatever the annuals are in it, like you said, it's just a plop it in and done.
Terrific.
Yeah.
What would you recommend if somebody was wanting the annual for color? What would you recommend in our climate? Let's say especially, something that's going to take our heat.
Yeah. You cannot go wrong with begonias. You can buy them a flat. A flat gets you, a flat used to be a 6-pack. Well, it's a 4-pack now. But, a flat's going to be, even with today's prices, $15, and that's going to give you about probably 20 or so plants. So a little bit will go a long way for those. They'll take full hot sun. They don't need fertilizing, deadheaded, tending, any of that sort of stuff. And they'll do pretty well in a fair amount of shade too.
Would you put them directly in the ground, or would you put them in pots?
You could do either one. And if I was going to put them in the ground, I would what's the word? Put a patch here, a patch there.
Not just one here. You put like 3 or 5 clustered in odd numbers.
Clumps the word I was
clump
looking
them
for.
together. Well, I know we said the annuals of begonia is a good one, but if someone has holes in their foundational shrubbery, or they don't have foundational shrubbery and are looking to plant a few shrubs to increase that curb appeal, what species of shrubbery would you recommend in our area?
Well, that's a loaded question.
I know.
Because
is it
sun or shade, what kind of soil you got, what kind of drainage you got, all that stuff. Back to using something other than a plant. If you've had your row of azaleas or boxwoods or whatever, and there's always going to be that one that never keeps up with the rest of the group.
For sure.
Put a bird bath there. Put some kind of
a hardscape.
Yeah, as I call them, a doolally.
I like that.
Doesn't have to be a plant, but some kind of garden ornament. It fills that hole, because even if you wanted to plant another azalea, it's still not going to catch up. So,
Right.
you know,
And you could
got
take it
that.
with you conceivably. Of course, if we would have to list that as something that was going with the homeowner.
Right.
But if we're listing the home,
Mhm.
and you have, say, a beautiful pot that you pay $300 for,
Yeah.
and it's on its side and it has annuals spilling down, you could
Yeah.
say,
Mhm.
we want to take that with us, or a fountain or a bird
Yeah.
bath, something
Yeah.
like that.
But just rattle off if the front of your house is in shade, and there again, without going into a whole lot of detail, do you live with the deer? You plant all this stuff, and next week they've come in and pruned it all down to nothing for you. A very easy plant to grow in full shade are the yews.
Definitely.
They're evergreen. They're drought tolerant. They grow relatively quickly. I have never known anybody to have yews that deer eat.
They've never touched mine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the Duke's Garden is a nice one that you can find at any nursery. A 3-gallon is going to be $40
Is
ish, give or take.
Duke's more prostrate, or is it more upright?
It's the upright.
Okay.
And then you could put, if you wanted to go with that monochromatic all green, if that's the style that fits your house,
Mm-hmm.
then you could get the Cephalotaxis Harringtonia Scott Wallace prostrata.
Wow. And that's why you are my guest today, because you can rattle off the Latin names.
I've practiced that one. But you can put that in front, and it is the one that's going to grow low and wide. And there again, if you're planning this year to put your house on the market next year,
Right.
that's going to make a really good show by the time you start showing your house.
Or if you're a new homeowner, because we have a lot of people, we find houses for
Mm-hmm.
them, and then there's no plantings or no foundational plantings, and
Yeah.
things have gotten old and need to be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't ask you this question up front to let you prepare, but what do you see as the number one new trend in gardening or plants?
Doing away with the lawn.
For sure. For
Yep.
sure.
And according to this old house, they say if you want to date, we always hear that the kitchen is dated or the bathroom is dated. But if you want to date your lawn, put they didn't say Alberta spruce, but put your matching whatevers on each side of your porch.
Mm-hmm.
Then your row of boxwoods or azaleas or laurels or, whatever the plant is, a row of those, and then a tall, pointy something at the corner of your house.
Mm-hmm. Very symmetrical. Everything is going
It's
more
just-
organic.
Mm-hmm.
I know, especially, I always think England, and I watch a lot of UK gardening shows, I know you do too. Everything is so organic,
Mhm.
and they're wanting to make everything, and my garden's formal, you know that,
Mhm.
and of course I have a woodland garden, but, and your garden I think is more organic.
Oh, mine's wild and
Yeah.
willy, and Mother Nature just does what she does.
That's what's in. I mean, the Chelsea Garden Show, they were showing it looked like they had just thrown the plants out. And it was like a natural environment, and I'm seeing also an emphasis on pollinators.
Oh, yeah. Oh, geez, pollinators. I mean, and that's true, though. If we keep using these chemicals,
Yeah.
and having that perfect lawn that takes all of that spraying, and oh, geez, like your laurels on each side of your front door,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to get the shot hole. They're going to
For
get
sure.
bugs. But you just live with it. You prune it out. I mean, so what are you going to do? Get out there and get your malathion and your all those other horrible things so that you have a beautiful laurel, but then where's your squash going to come from?
Yeah, because
And-
you kill the bees and there's no
Right.
pollinators. But I also think about exposure. My children, my
Oh, yeah.
pets. I mean,
Yeah.
and then if you spray the lawn, like for example, I got fungus. We had to spray the lawn. Well, then you think, okay, it's raining. It's going down into the storm sewer, which is going right into Lake Harville, which we drink from,
Mhm.
and that's everywhere in America. That's not just here.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I ask all of my guests if they have a quote that is one of their favorite quotes, or somebody that they love to follow their quotes. Is there a quote you live by?
Well, of course, other than the golden rule, but I don't remember where I saw this, but it stuck with me. It is a Mark of an uneducated mind not to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. And Aristotle said that.
I love that. You've told me that before, and I have remembered that. That is a wonderful quote.
You know, I can listen to you and kind of sort of like we all do.
Right.
You get a fourth of the way into it and I'm thinking,
Mm-hmm.
or tune out, or I'm never going to agree with that, or whatever. But I should still listen to you and think about what you've said.
For sure. If you have a different philosophy, you might learn something new, and if you don't like it, you don't have to live it.
I mean, I've still listened to you. I've heard you out. It may or may not make a change for me, but, you know, it might help me to see things other way. Like the pollinators. You know, we really are going to have to get over this golf. You know, your front yard doesn't need to be a golf course.
Well, everybody's having to change. I know I talked with my 98-year-old uncle at lunch last week who worked for Duke Energy. He's still sharp as a tack. And we were talking about load shedding. And he said, people are going to have to get used to having less.
Mm-hmm.
He said, like they did when I was a boy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is, if we're going to have less pesticides and all this, people are going to have to be okay with being more organic.
Yeah.
Not just in the way we garden, but the way it looks.
Right.
You know, having your home be of nature, not something that is so controlled and constrained.
And Mother Nature's not, you know, she's going to have her way, so it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want to do, but eventually she's going to say, watch this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's a good segue into, I always ask all my guests if they have a life lesson. Is there a life lesson?
Oh, geez, yeah, hundreds.
What's a top one you would say?
Well, a top one, I'm trying to get used to saying 60. I'm going to be 60 in April.
You look good.
Oh, thank you. With the hindsight kicking in, I would have started saving for retirement earlier.
For sure.
You know, 21, you don't think about retirement, and I was waiting tables then, making fantastic money. Didn't save a dime, you know.
I didn't either when I was in my 20s.
Really never even thought about it. Mm-hmm. But I also try not to learn those same lessons over and over again. You know, as they say, no education in the second kick of a mule. You know,
I like that.
How many times are you going to have to make that mistake before it finally sinks in?
For sure. Well, and that's a good segue into, it's a good time when you're younger to buy a house. Mm-hmm. Don't rent. I always say you're going to buy someone's house in your lifetime. You're either going to buy yours or your landlord's.
Right.
So the younger you can start building that equity, the better. And a quote I use a lot, both in gardening and in life, is there's 2 times that is the best time to plant a tree. And that is 20 years ago or today.
And today.
So plant the tree. If you didn't plant it 20 years ago, plant it now. If you didn't save 20 years ago and you didn't invest, start today.
Right.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for being one of my first guests.
Thank you for
You are
having
one
me.
of my dear friends. I just love talking gardening with you.
We could rattle on for longer than anybody would care to listen to us rattle, probably.
Well, certainly. And again, Susan Temple, Master Gardener, and I'm David Locke with Locke & Key Associates at Keller Williams, Western Upstate.